minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you for your service, and thank you for your answers to so many questions today. I want to cover some ground that's already been touched on, and in a few places open some new questions, if I might. Like so many of us, I've had the opportunity to meet with Dreamers, both in my home state of Delaware, where quite a few are attending Delaware State University, but also in the hallway here, both before and during this hearing. Did I hear correctly you have yet to meet with any Dreamers?
We've met with many of the associations. We've met with many members of Congress, but I personally have not, to my knowledge, met with a Dreamer. No, sir.
I just find it a compelling circumstance, an opportunity to hear from them about how they came to this country, what their concerns are, and what sort of pressures they're under as we wait to find a bipartisan path towards resolving this situation. And I won't go through it in detail. We've heard from Senators Graham and Durbin today, I think, a compelling summary of how they've reached a responsible compromise where each side has given and where we should be ready to move forward on a bipartisan compromise to address DACA. I think it's urgent we do so. We on this committee have heard from a bipartisan group of former secretaries of Homeland Security that we cannot wait until March to fix DACA. They say, quote, the realistic deadline for successfully establishing a Dreamer program in time to prevent large-scale loss of work authorization is actually mid-January. Do you agree with Secretaries Chertoff, Napolitano, and Johnson that implementing a successful program by the White House's self-imposed March 5 deadline requires at least 45 days of lead time?
What I would hope is that we could work with Congress to address that. As long as we are finding a permanent solution for that population, it would seem to me through law we can adjust any timelines we need to ensure that they can continue to work.
So the administration would be open to delaying further its self-imposed March 5 deadline?
Well, if we are finding a permanent solution, in part of that, we can adjust the timelines. But no, as I testified earlier, the administration itself is not looking to extend the March 5th deadline upon a determination it's unconstitutional.
Well, I think there remains real urgency, and the reason for meeting with Dreamers and hearing from them is to get a clearer sense of how it's impacting their lives.
Sir, if I could, I cannot stress how strong I feel about finding a permanent solution for this population. So I'm happy to work with you and anyone in the days and minutes that follow this hearing to do just that. So I do feel the urgency. I think we owe it to them and we owe it to the American people and our ideals to find a solution.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. As for the travel ban, we're now on the third version of President Trump's travel ban, which blocks individuals from certain countries, primarily Muslim-majority countries, from entering the United States. And I've joined more than 100 of my colleagues in the House and the Senate in filing a series of amicus briefs or amici briefs that have challenged these different travel bans. Do you agree that citizenship is an unlikely indicator of terrorism threat, as a draft DHS report recently concluded?
If you're talking about the Section 11 report, what we found, unfortunately, is that 73% of those convicted of international terrorism-related charges were foreign-born. So in that case, that is an indicator.
Foreign-born, yet what has been at issue in a number of these challenges is the correlation between foreign-born and the specific nations that have been identified for the development of this travel ban. I'll just remind you that we continue, those of us who've challenged it in court, to see a lack of clear correlation between risk to the United States and the nations that are identified. Let me move on, if I could, to the incidents in Charlottesville. A May 2017 Joint Intelligence Bulletin from DHS and the FBI concluded that, quote, white supremacist extremism poses a persistent threat of lethal violence, close quote. Do you know whether DHS issued a warning to state and local law enforcement authorities before the deadly attack in Charlottesville that the Unite the Right rally could turn violent and from this assessment was expected to likely become violent?
I am not aware, no, sir.
So my concern here is that there were reports several days before the event where DHS was clear that an escalating series of clashes had created a potential powder keg, and a failure to notify state and local law enforcement may have prevented them from being fully prepared to confront this latest episode of white supremacist extremism. Have you personally briefed the President on the threat of violent white supremacist movements within the United States?
What we've talked about generally is terrorism and violence in all its forms. As part of that, yes, we have briefed at a high level the instances that we know. The FBI, as you know, the Department of Justice is also very involved in that topic.
And is it your sense that the president places a sufficiently high priority on being prepared for and responding to white supremacist violence among the various threats to security within the United States?
I believe that he has been clear that he abhors violence in any form that it might take. I think at DHS we need to continue to do more, not only to ensure that the state and local officials have the information they need, but to be able to provide the warning signs, the what are we looking for? How do we know as this starts to occur within a community? What more can we do? And we're looking at that now.
Well, thank you. As a member of this committee and the co-chair of the Law Enforcement Caucus, I'd welcome opportunities to hear from you about how you think understand and respond to unacceptable incidents of violence that are rooted in white supremacist thinking. I also think it's important that all elected leaders send messages that make it clear how unacceptable these practices and attitudes are within the United States rather than winking at them or inflaming them. I'm a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee as well as this committee, which just released a minority report on Vladimir Putin's assault on our democracy, and in particular, actions outside the United States, actions around the world to interfere with elections among our vital Western allies, and its implications for U.S. national security. The report notes that Russian intelligence actually circulated a fake U.S. Department of Homeland Security assessment that the 2016 U.S. election was not a victim of cyber attacks. What's the president's strategy? What's the department's strategy for countering the Kremlin's disinformation operations like this one, which can be significantly misleading to Americans who are trying to better understand what happened and what may happen?
It's a very serious issue, first of all, so let's underscore that. Anything that in any way interferes with the integrity of our election system should be taken very, very seriously. The State Department, as you know, as part of a strategy to address a whole variety of issues, both positive and negative with our relationship with Russia, continues to look at this issue. As you know, it's a balance. We have to find the ways to target our reaction that will have the effect of having them reduce their specific actions. So we have to find the way in which best to do that. But it will continue to be a priority in terms of conversations. And certainly from a DHS perspective, we're looking at a variety of ways to do that just in our general conversations with the private sector. How can they ensure that the information they're providing is in fact accurate, whether it be about elections or something else?
The report actually recommends that the president establish an interagency fusion cell modeled on the National Counterterrorism Center to coordinate the United States' response to Russia's influence operations. Is that something you'd endorse?
I'm not familiar with it, but I'd certainly be happy to look at it. It will take all of government to be able to fight this. So,
it will. And I must say, in response to a questioning by a previous senator, I heard you say that you agree that Russia interfered in our 2016 presidential election. You agree that that is the unanimous conclusion of our intelligence community, and that given that, they're likely to interfere with our next elections in 2018. Did I hear that correctly?
They certainly will try.
And Madam Secretary, I'm very encouraged to hear you say that so clearly, because bluntly, for us to be prepared and for us to work together and for us to defend our democracy requires clarity about what happened. Can you offer any understanding for me about whether it undermines your leadership in this role to have a president who repeatedly changes the subject, suggests this didn't happen, suggests it somehow is Democrats complaining about the outcome of the election, or suggests that it's a misleading witch hunt, for us to continue to try and understand what happened in 2016 and to prepare to defend our own democracy from a likely repeated attempt by Russia or other adversaries in 2018?
I do think that clarity is important, and I do think that we all need to work together to be very clear what specifically happened and how to prevent it in the future.
Is it at all puzzling to you that the president hasn't been in the lead in defending our democracy from these attacks?
I'm not sure I would agree with the characterization, but I do think we need to do more, and that's certainly my intent from the Department of Homeland Security's perspective.
Last question. This month, President Trump disbanded the Commission on Election Integrity, citing the opposition of many states and ongoing legal challenges. And he subsequently tweeted that he asked the Department of Homeland Security to review these issues and determine next courses of action. What prior experience does the Department of Homeland Security have in investigating allegations of voter fraud?
So voter fraud, as I mentioned earlier, is a large topic. The part that DHS plays, we're looking at the integrity of the cyber systems. We'll continue to work with state and localities on that. We also do have a program where states come to us with concern about illegal immigrants voting in a federal election. It's purely voluntary. If they ask us to look to see if some of their voters had the right to vote, we do that in a system that we currently have. So those would be the type of roles. Other than that, we're just working with state and locals to ensure if there's anything they need with respect to their infrastructure or systems, working with the secretaries of state that we can provide that.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, I'm convinced that we face a genuine threat to our next election, and I think it's important that our president speak clearly about this, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with you to try and both resolve our pressing challenges in immigration and in finding a reasonable compromise on immigration law to protect dreamers, but also, more importantly, to protect our democracy itself in the next election.